in general, I kind of divide things up into a couple basic categories. So first we have our quads and calves. And I know I'm lumping these together, but it's because as you run, these muscle groups primarily function to stabilize your knee and ankle joint, while other muscles are the primary drivers of the force and are creating high amounts of force to propel you forward. But the quads are working together with the hamstrings to create knee stiffness, and it's that stiffness that when you hit the ground, you're able to use your leg efficiently to create forces and propel yourself forward. So, as we go through, think of the quads and the calves as acting in primarily an isometric way, with some eccentric function, but they're working in a really high force situation to stabilize that leg. That's their kind of primary role during sprinting. Also, kind of, not to get too sidetracked here, but there are some differences between the start of a sprint and the acceleration phase, the top speed phase, and then the trying to maintain that top speed, sort of the final slowdown. We're going to concentrate primarily on the acceleration and the top speed phase. And with that said, the role changes for the quads and the calves in the initial stages of the acceleration, especially if the person is starting out of blocks, which they shouldn't be because we're talking about non-track athletes. The quads and calves have a little bit more of a concentric role, but primarily they're functioning to stiffen those two joints. So when the prime movers of this action are firing at high velocities and high forces, that the force is efficiently translated through that segment and into the ground. So then the next category are sort of the prime movers of sprinting, and that's the glutes and the hamstrings. The glutes are a little more clear in terms of their role in sprinting. They're a big, powerful muscle that is great at creating hip extension. And so if you kind of imagine in your head somebody running by, their glutes are the thing that are powering them through most of that action. When you're in your stance phase, you're starting with your toe strike is a little out in front of your center of mass, but it quickly cycles through, and your foot is behind you through most of that on the ground. Your glute is the main driver of that hip extension and is imparting most of the forces into the ground. But it's combined with your hamstring. And your hamstring's a little trickier, being biarticular in nature. It serves two roles. One as a prime mover of hip extension, but then also it serves in combination with your quads to maintain stiffness in your knee joint. So if you think your foot is landing on the ground, your knee is not changing angle much, and your ankle is not changing in the angle much when it's on the ground, your glute is creating this really high force, and it's creating that really rapidly in combination with your hamstring to extend your thigh beyond your body. So, and then I wrote trunk up here. I wrote that because I didn't want to neglect it, but in terms of the scope of this conversation, we're not going to get too much into that. But your trunk certainly has a role in maintaining, your trunk musculature certainly has a role in maintaining your trunk position during sprinting, which is important. Especially during the acceleration phase, the anterior part of your trunk musculature is helping keep your body lean down so that your center of mass can be further forward, so that you can you know, impart forces into the ground for longer and get yourself up to speed. And then on the back side of the trunk, your spinal erectors have a role in maintaining stiffness in your trunk and along with your abs. And so it makes your body a more efficient system altogether. But we're going to keep our focus on basically the lower body musculature, just to keep this lecture somewhat abbreviated. You know, getting back to the role of all these things, when we think about how they function during sprinting, if the athlete's goal is to improve on their sprinting speed, we need to make sure that we are training these in a way that is going to accommodate the demands from the sport. So that has a lot of implications in terms of the exercises we select, the orientation of those exercises, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and also the way in which we program them in terms of the beginning or the end of the training session, as well as selecting the resistance and looking at you know, something that's going to allow us to have high movement velocity versus low movement velocity, and thinking about how those will have an effect. You know, as we get into this kind of area of training recommendations, we're going to talk a little bit more about force vector specificity. Now, I wrote up here also in the weight room, because it's a little out of the scope of this, again, to talk much beyond what we can do, you know, in this facility or in the weight room. I could discuss a little bit more about my thoughts on how to program different jumping or plyometric exercises, but to keep this somewhat concise, I'm just going to talk about the different lifting things that we do.